Okay, starting with ePrivacy, we've got enforcement and we've got legal updates. On the enforcement side of things, on April 25th, following that FTC fine that we had discussed in our previous newsroom, the Czech DPA imposed a separate 15 million euro fine on Avast. That's the antivirus company that had sold browsing history data about more than 100 million customers to third parties for advertising purposes, for onboarding purposes, and so on. The supervisory authority, again in the Czech Republic, has now alleged that the company had falsely claimed to have anonymized the data and that the only purpose of its processing was to create statistical analysis, which then obviously wasn't true. More things.
On April 12th, the connected TV company Roku suffered its second major data breach, affecting 576,000 accounts. This security breach seems to have been limited to unauthorized access to those accounts that were sharing passwords across multiple services. The company announced the rollout of two-factor authentication.
Exactly, and the last time we saw the rollout of 2FA, so two-factor authentication, was when 23andMe had a data breach, which we also discussed in our previous newsroom. What else?
On April 29th, the Federal Communications Commission announced enforcement actions against all 4 major telecom providers for their sale of consumer location data. The cumulative fines neared $200 million.
Yes, that's T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon, and Sprint. And of the 4, T-Mobile received the biggest fine. That's $80 million.
In early May, as widely reported in the New York Times, 2 voice actors sued synthetic voice startup Lovo for making their voices widely available to an unidentified number of businesses and use cases after they had been paid to provide voice samples for research purposes.
Which we have used in the past. We're not using today, so the voice you're hearing is not Lovo's. A few days later, actress Scarlett Johansson accused OpenAI of using her own voice in that new, in the new tool being released back then, GPT-4o, this multimodal assistant. And it is well known that Sam Altman, OpenAI CEO, is a big fan of Her, the movie, where she plays that voice, the AI's voice. And in fact, he had already approached the actress to count on her voice, and she had declined. So it's pretty obvious that they were trying to get as close as they could to her real voice. She has invoked the same, her publicity rights, and the California law, which protects them pretty strongly.
Following widespread public concerns, the ICO announced an investigation of Microsoft's brand new Copilot Recall feature, which records all activity on each specific device, including conversations and information exchanges with other data subjects. The software giant then decided to postpone its launch.
Okay, moving on to legal updates and guidelines.
On March 25th, Florida's governor signed House Bill 3, HB 3, into law, prohibiting children under 14 from signing up to social media accounts and requiring parental consent for those under 16. Accounts belonging to minors should be deleted, and requests made by teenagers should be honored.
Very good. Yes. Then on April 7th, a draft was presented for a new federal U.S. privacy law. This is the American Privacy Rights Act, or APRA. It's a bipartisan, bicameral effort, and despite of that, the draft apparently has very slim chances of surviving. But we covered these chances and the background to APRA in an interview with Brian Falk on Masters of Privacy, again, last month.
The widely expected EDPB opinion on consent or pay was finally released on April 17th, following a question presented by the DPAs of Norway, Hamburg, and the Netherlands. Its conclusion, as implemented by large platforms, the consent or pay choice does not amount to freely given consent as defined by the GDPR. The question remained as to whether large publishers would qualify as large platforms, as opposed to pointing instead towards the very large online platforms or gatekeepers defined by the Digital Services Act and Digital Markets Act respectively. As subsequently clarified by the EDPB team, this concept is referring to the specific independent framework of the GDPR where a particular platform may independently qualify as large in the context of consent or pay models, as a result of its ability to attract large numbers of users. We have discussed this dilemma at length during recent Masters of Privacy episodes with Rob Bateman, Romain Robert, and Peter Craddock.
Yes, there's been a lot of talk about that, so I won't add to it. Then on April 24th, Joe Biden signed the forced sale or prohibition of TikTok into law after the US Senate managed to approve the initiative through, by bundling it with a joint aid package for both Ukraine and Israel. It was a quite surreal vote, but in the end everything was done at once, and therefore the sale or prohibition of TikTok was approved. It will be challenged in court because it affects the First Amendment, but we'll see whether it succeeds.
A few recent GDPR-related CJU rulings are shedding more light on the potential exposure of companies to a novel private right of action under the new Collective Redress Directive. As per the Kochner versus Europol ruling in Slovakia, compensation will be granted for non-material damages, such as the public exposure of intimate text messages.
Okay, I've been looking for a place to bury a discount code for comply.org somewhere in this podcast, and this is just as good as any other. So, use MOP24, uppercase, when prompted for a credit card if you happen to make it that far, and you will get 50% off your cross-border privacy vault. But then the question is comply.org of any use to you? And the answer is probably not. So here's the description.
Comply.org provides a unique attestation URL for software as a service providers that require auditing in the context of third-party risk management. Simply share your unique URL with DPOs or procurement teams, and we will confirm that you've done your homework. If, on the other hand, you are a data controller or a buyer of cloud-based marketing technology, e-commerce or media software, perhaps you want to offer this discount to that highly regarded startup that provides unbeatable value, but cannot figure out how to put together the most basic privacy compliance or AI governance paperwork.
Whatever you do, use MOP24, again, uppercase MOP24, on comply.org, and you'll be able to fly in no time. For any other needs, for example, auditing your current suppliers or hidden vendors as a data controller, just go to privacycloud.com and find the most appropriate offering. And now, back to the show.
Vermont's highly onerous privacy law, Vermont Data Privacy Act, saw the light on May 11th. Besides creating a private right of action, it prohibits the sale of sensitive personal data and imposes HIPAA's identification standards on a wide range of use cases.
Then, adding to that, to Vermont, Colorado enacted the first state-level AI law in the US on May 17th, introducing important transparency obligations as well as safeguarding against high-risk systems. There was also a draft being presented for this is a draft because the Colorado law was actually enacted, but there was a draft for a Secure AI Act introduced in the Senate, so at federal level, on May 1st. And then for its part, the ICO, so the UK Supervisory Authority, defended its position regarding the need for an AI-specific law or regulation, as the EU has done, basically saying that the UK GDPR will suffice to regulate its current use cases. We were lucky enough to have Stephen Almond from the ICO on Masters of Privacy. I was lucky enough to interview him to explore this in detail, and we've provided a link to the interview in the show notes. Then the new European Digital Identity Regulation, so EIDAS 2.0, so amending a prior instrument from 2014, entered into force on May 20th. So this will now kick off the process to provide EU citizens with digital wallets. allowing them to share, different attributes like your legal name, date of birth, professional qualification, bank balance, or medical history, without exposing any other personal details. And we discussed its implications on the exercise of data protection and privacy rights in a recent Masters of Privacy interview with Adrian Dirk, who's the CEO of Lissy, a digital identity infrastructure provider. Staying in the EU, on May 23rd, the EDPB, the European Data Protection Board, released a first report from its ChatGPT task force, addressing multiple concerns associated with large language models, or foundation models in general, and specifically ChatGPT. So, the EDPB made clear that foundation model providers cannot assume that the data subject has manifestly made her sensitive personal data public when scraping it off the internet for training purposes. So if it is sensitive data, that assumption goes too far, they said. As a second conclusion, LLMs will find it difficult to comply with the data accuracy principle. So unless individuals are able to clearly tell when generated text is biased or made up. And lastly, certain data subject rights are really hard to maintain, to keep in the context of LLMs. So, for example, the right to rectification, that sort of stems from the accuracy principle. It's very hard to make it happen. So, OpenAI has suggested that people should opt for, for the right to delete your records, to delete your data, to have your data removed instead of opting for rectification. Now, moving on to MarTech and AdTech, on April 23rd, Google announced that it was yet again going to postpone the end of third-party cookies. So it was not going to happen at the end of this year, 2024, as originally promised. So, as you know, the UK Competition and Markets Authority is behind these delays. We've mentioned this a few times. There was a new report from this UK CMA covering whatever is pending, whatever they think is pending for Google not to benefit from the end of third-party cookies by being in control of the first-party data alternative to the open market. And so we discussed this, if you want to know more, in detail during another interview on Masters of Privacy with Alan Chappell. What else?
Revolut has launched an ad business. A few large banks have explored this before, mostly retreating for fear of a privacy or regulatory backlash. They happen to sit on top of the most valuable intent data available, actual financial transactions. Analysts are pointing towards curated marketplaces and an avoidance of external or open market opportunities to avoid risk. In the meantime, the retail media market pie kept growing, with Walmart becoming more ubiquitous and sophisticated, including a deal with Disney to leverage its conversion signals against the media giant's ad inventory, as well as adding connected TV capabilities to its offering after purchasing Vizio, a TV manufacturer that subsidizes its own devices in exchange for viewership data and ad inventory. For its part, Albertsons announced non-endemic advertising solutions, showing ads which are not related to the products being sold. And Costco launched its own initiative to monetize its trove of loyalty membership data.
That's it, yes. Then also in early June, so this month, Oracle announced that it was stepping out of AdTech. So that's the end of Bluekai, so once a very popular DMP that it had acquired, a data management platform, so heavily reliant on third-party cookies and I guess in recent times being replaced by customer data platforms and other first-party data management platforms. And a closure of the business unit that once included Datalogics, which was the primary means, or so I believe, to upload first-party data or CRM data onto Facebook, for example, so as to define lookalike audiences. Oracle had also acquired, if you remember, AdThis, which was the social media aggregator for websites, which in the end will also do aggregate profiles across different social media platforms. And its possibilities were heavily limited once privacy regulations started to make inroads. What else?
On June 17th, Mozilla announced the acquisition of Anonym, a solution to provide privacy-safe means of measurement, targeting, and optimization.
Yes. And all along, we've been talking about the loss of signal because of, again, privacy, and also because of big tech's reaction to privacy safeguards or their need to position themselves in that space. And so there's been growth, there's been of course, a development in the media mix modeling space as an alternative to attribution that is based on granular data. And so the largest platforms have been offering their own MMM or media mix modeling solutions and opening them up to the community as a means to sort of make their lives easier. Moving on to AI competition and digital markets. What's happening?
Meta released the Llama 3 model, together with a Meta AI assistant, now publicly available across all of their products in the US. It is understood that Meta will now aim to take on Google Search with a very convenient way to find an answer to any question from the most ubiquitous apps in the world. The highly controversial, Meta-powered Ray-Ban smart glasses could play a key role in this new paradigm.
Besides that, and parallel to the consent or pay opinion that was issued by the EDPB, as we said earlier, the European Commission is undertaking its own investigation of Meta's consent or pay system, in connection in this case with the Digital Markets Act, which requires gatekeepers to gather valid, free consent in order to combine data across different services. For example, combine data from WhatsApp with data from Instagram. So they're now investigating whether that is valid. Also in this space, so AI, OpenAI released a system, GPT-4o, which we've mentioned when talking about, Scarlett Johansson's voice. That's when he was sort of used. And this GPT-4o will allow people to interact across different data inputs. So it's called multimodal, right? And that also shows that the company is starting to build B2C applications.
This is probably bad news for everyone hoping to flourish on top of the various GPT models, but it also allows them to compete with Meta's integrated/vertical approach to LLMs.
But Google also announced a multimodal capabilities a day later, which is why OpenAI announced them the day before, of course. So here's more on this.
Google announced its own multimodal capabilities a day later. Its own Gemini-powered assistant and solutions can easily generate images, video, or music, while Android-powered Pixel phones will run a local version that would limit itself to contextual training and /or inferences, thus providing additional privacy and accuracy safeguards.
And then after that, of course, Apple joined the party, but then it received bad news from the European Commission, which is announcing it was opening an investigation into the App Store. So we understand that the mitigation measures it offered to comply with the DMA, with the Digital Markets Act, are insufficient. Lastly, in this section, on June 14th, Meta announced that it would drop its plans after all these changes to their privacy notices with plenty of public outcry, its plans to train AI models on Facebook and Instagram user data in the EU. So now they will proceed as intended in the rest of the world, but their algorithms will not be trained on user data in the EU. Now, moving on to pets or privacy-enhancing technologies and zero-party data.
We have been hosting more interviews on specific privacy-enhancing technologies, covering confidential computing as it applies to data clean rooms, with Matthias Engelmann, and homomorphic encryption with Ellison and Williams.
That's it, yes. And then I was at the Pepper event, the Usenix conference on privacy engineering practice and respect, over in Santa Clara, California. And it was great to see all of these teams, Snap, TikTok, Google, even Meta, and others presenting their privacy engineering solutions and skills. And we saw plenty of interesting things. We saw, for example, Airbnb, explaining that content management platforms were simply not up to the task of handling all of the nuances of cross-border privacy compliance, so they had to develop their own CMP, or seeing how TikTok was combining differential privacy with secure multi-party computation in ad performance measurement, or seeing Matt Gershoff from Conductrix applying K-anonymity to A/B testing, and other things. It was really interesting. Now, moving on to the future of media.
OpenAI signed agreements with the Financial Times, Prisa and Le Monde, similar to those previously announced with Axel Springer. These will allow the generative AI giant to show current news on ChatGPT, as well as to train its models on a vast amount of historical data.
That's it. And finally, the Trade Desk, so that's the largest independent DSP or demand-side platform in the open ecosystem, made a lot of noise publishing a list of the top 100 publishers. So, in theory, making it easy for buyers, for advertisers to buy across a highly curated list of premium domains.
Acting as a sort of accreditation body for quality media would at the same time allow the Trade Desk to promote its own ecosystem and Universal ID, or UID, protocol at a time when third-party cookies are finally poised to disappear.
Alessandro De Sanche, who's been a repeat guest with us at Master of Privacy, has written about this thing extensively, and we'll add a link to his thoughts. And that's it for today and for this quarter. Thank you very much. Have a great summer.